thank you for joining us in this Khuluma. So Aninka wrote the paper, and it was titled Mining Magnates and Traditional Leaders, the Role of Law in Elevating Elite Interest and Deepening Exclusion between the period of 2002 and 2018. And it's a very interesting paper, and we have made available copies, so please, if you haven't picked it up on your way in, make sure that you do take a copy when you leave. So just a little bit about Aninka. She's Dr. Aninka Claassens, and she's the former Director of Land and Accountability Research, and currently the Chief Researcher at the same institution. In 2009, she brought the Rural Women's Movement Action Research Program into the Law and Race and Gender Unit at UCT. And since then, she's been working with Sindiso, and they've worked together on the Traditional Courts Bill. There is a history which we can make available, but I think those are the introductions that I want to make. And Aninka will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. She's got a slide presentation. And please make sure that you are seated in a manner that you can see the slide presentation either on that end of the room or the other end of the room, whichever works for you. Our second guest is Lungisile Ntsebenza, and he is professor. He holds the A.C. Jordan Chair in African Studies at the University of Cape Town. He's also the holder of the National Research Foundation Research Chair in Land Reform and Democracy in South Africa, and he's got a long history, a long CV. I'm going to just introduce him with those few words. And once Aninka has made her presentation, he will respond about 10 to 15 minutes to her presentation, and then we will open to the audience for questions or comments. And that's how we will structure the evening, if that's in order with you. Okay, so let's begin. Let me just say a special welcome to the people of Nyanga and of Delft, who has come through traffic to be here. I'm not excluding the others who came in private cars and so on, but I just wanted to acknowledge and note that they are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. And just to say that coming here is very much like coming home for me, because I worked for the Black Sash as part of TRAC from 1983 to 1990. And also my very first job was an initiative of the Quakers, and George Ellis is here, one of the people who employed me, and that was in 1977, just after.
There's a picture of you at the back.
Yes, yes. That's from 1986 in Driefontein with Beauty Mkhize. I think it's quite unfair to put me in front of that picture. Anyway, so just to say, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, and the geography of poverty and marginalization points to the structural factors that drive this. So if you look at this map, it looks at where poverty is concentrated. And the dark blue is the deepest poverty. The light blue is the less deep poverty. And those areas of blue are mapped onto the former homelands. And this is research which looks at the levels of deprivation in the former homelands compared with the rest of South Africa. And what you see there are figures like 73.7% living environment deprivation compared with 27% in the rest of South Africa. So what drove this desperate inequality in the former homelands? And two of the key drivers were mining, and the other was really the division of South Africa into the 13% of reserves that was brought about by the 1913 Land Act, and then severely exacerbated by Bantustan consolidation, where we saw that process of people being forcibly removed from so-called white South Africa into the homelands. And basically what I'm going to argue is that we have got, there are bills before Parliament, in fact one that has actually been completely approved through the NCOP and the National Assembly, which entrench this structural inequality. And they do that by denying that rural African people have property rights. They deny that rural African people who've inherited land over generations own that land. They posit that the land belongs to traditional leaders. They deny that rural African people have decision-making authority over their land because they posit that the sole decision-making authority vests in traditional leaders. And in doing that, they default to the two primary justifications used during colonialism and apartheid to deny black people citizenship and to justify appropriating their land on the basis that they don't have property rights in that land. So we are having those two key features of colonialism and apartheid reinscribed in bills that are before Parliament in 2018 and 2019. And what we have seen since at least 2002 is a resurgence of a whole lot of the Bantustan practices that led to the massive anti-Bantustan rebellions. We've seen people being forced off their land for mining. We've seen traditional leaders demanding that people pay levies. And we're seeing increased examples of traditional leaders selling land that belongs to people, to other people, and especially to foreigners and to foreign companies for their own personal profit. So this process is not something that started under Jacob Zuma. This process started in 2002 under Thabo Mbeki. And one's got to look at the kind of architecture of these bills. In 2002, the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act was enacted, and it cut in black shareholders just as the mining boom moved to the former homelands. Because one of the strange ironies of our situation is that all the platinum is concentrated in the former homelands. That titanium is in the former Transkei, that you've got coal all over the former provinces, former Bantustans that became Mpumalanga and Limpopo. So at that moment, particular people, Ramaphosa, Posa, Patrice Motsepe, get cut in on these mining deals. And in 2003, we get a law called the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act, which revived the disputed boundaries put in place by the Bantu Authorities Act. Now, many of us in this room are old enough to remember the kinds of rebellions, the Pondoland Rebellion, the Zerist Uprising, the Sekekuni Land Uprising against the Bantu authorities. And now we have a law that takes those very contested boundaries that were used to reward compliant leaders and punish those who opposed Bantustans as the kind of boundaries of the traditional leaders of the future. And then we had a law in 2004, the Communal Land Rights Act, that vested control and ownership of all communal land, all land in the former homelands, in the chiefs who headed those tribal authority areas, and in the chiefs who were made, the lineages of the chiefs who were recognized during apartheid. So at the same time, the South African Law Reform Commission produced a customary courts bill in 2003, which regulated how customary courts would operate. But the South African Law Reform Commission said, yes, you must have these courts, but people must be able to use the courts that they choose. If they choose to use the magistrates' court, they must be able to go there. If they want to use the traditional court, they must go there. And the traditional leaders absolutely objected to that. They said if people have any other option, then they won't come to their courts. So they drafted an extraordinary bill, the Traditional Courts Bill of 2008, which states that it was drafted in collaboration with the House of Traditional Leaders. And that bill authorized traditional leaders to strip people of their customary entitlements, in other words, their land. It authorized them to demand unpaid labor from anybody in the community, not even people in the cases before them. And it authorized these extraordinary kinds of punishments, and it was much opposed because people who said that they disputed the legitimacy of particular traditional leaders knew that they would get hauled before those traditional leaders who would have these extraordinary punitive powers. So there was a lot of resistance to these bills, and a case was launched immediately against the Communal Land Rights Act, where the act was found to be unconstitutional because it undermined tenure security by the North Gauteng High Court, and then taken on appeal by the state to the Constitutional Court, who struck it down in its entirety because the Constitutional Court said that the process of ramming it through Parliament didn't allow for any kind of deliberative democracy. And then an even bigger victory was that the Traditional Courts Bill was outvoted in Parliament, something that's never happened to an ANC-sponsored bill. It was outvoted by the provinces, who said, this bill does not accord with our customary law, because it provided for traditional leaders as presiding officers on the model of the kind of Black Administration Act, and had no recognition of village-level councils and the role played by councillors in listening to disputes and determining disputes. So that bill was outvoted in Parliament. Nevertheless, so they've got one law that has stuck, which is the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Bill, that entrenches those apartheid boundaries and entrenches the status of traditional leaders. But the two laws that were meant to give traditional leaders specific power, the one punitive power and the other power over land, which of course gives you power over people, were defeated because of strong resistance. But government has, despite this, treated traditional leaders as though they are the sole owners of communal land and have the sole decision-making authority. The Chamber of Mines, when asked how they could allow their members to sign deals with traditional leaders who have no legal authority to sign those deals, for two reasons, which we'll come to. When we asked them, how could you go along with this? These are multi-million deals, and yet they're legally precarious. They said, well, the Department of Mineral Resources told them they must sign deals with traditional leaders and not with the people on the ground. So what the Traditional KhoiSan Leadership Bill, which is the one that's just been passed by the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, does, is it for the first time empowers traditional leaders to sign deals with external parties, initially with no consultation. And then after a series of judgments, which we'll talk to, they included some compensation, but not with the people directly affected. Now, basically, the Constitution provides a right to tenure security. It says any person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices is entitled, to the extent provided by an act of Parliament, either to tenure which is legally secure or to comparable redress. And then it says Parliament must enact the legislation referred to in subsection 6. So that is a right. Everyone in the former homelands, tenure is legally insecure because of laws like the 1913 Land Act and the Black Land Regulations, which said that people would have just PTOs and not title deeds. A law was passed in 1996, an interim law, because at that stage government was working on a major piece of legislation to ensure that people got ownership of the land that they'd inherited over generations. But this interim law provides that no one may be deprived of their informal land right without their consent, except by expropriation. It includes customary and statutory land rights in the former homeland areas within the definition of informal rights, and it has been renewed annually. So, yet, government has simply failed to enforce IPILRA. And it has enabled a series of abuses that have resulted in these legally vulnerable mining and investment deals. So one is a lease that King Ndamase Ndamase of Western Ponderland has signed this year with a Chinese company, in which he exchanges 30 kilometers of coastline north and south of Port St. John's, and going inland, all the people living on, he agrees to remove all the people living on that land in exchange for rent of R1 million a year. In exchange for a rent of R1 million a year. So he's selling people's land rights for peanuts. There's the lease agreement written in, Mandarin and English. It says the area of leased land is 10,000 kilometers and 30 kilometers long, and it's on the coastland adjacent to the sea. And then during the construction period, they'll pay this R1 million a year, and then afterwards they'll cut in the king into 25% ownership. They're planning to build a Disneyland, to mine, to have a massive fisheries project, to have a cultural village, and to grow dacha. All for the personal profit of the king. Now, why did this Chinese company think it could sign a lease like this? Why did the king, whose signature I think we've got here, yes, there's his signature, why did he think he could get away with this? It's basically because these laws encourage the assumption that traditional leaders have sole, unfettered power and authority and do not have to be held accountable. That same king, Ndamase, there he is being given a police station inside his royal palace. Because the Eastern Cape government is rolling out police stations inside royal palaces. And that's partly because they haven't managed to pass the Traditional Courts Bill yet. And what's now going to happen is that when people want to go and report a matter to the police to get it prosecuted or to go to a magistrate's court, the policeman's going to say, hang on, you must take this matter to the traditional court. It also gives him, extraordinarily, it gives him coercive powers, actually, to complement, to be able to get away with this wholesale dispossession. There's also been a recent judgment in the Eastern Cape High Court about a woman, Base, from near Umtata. She and a whole lot of other women managed to establish sites in an area near Umtata in the 90s. They've built houses, they're single mothers, there are about 8 of them. And a couple of years ago, a local head woman came and said, each of you must pay me 10,000 rand, or you must get out of your house. And they said, why? We've been here for 20 years, and we haven't got that money. And she has a band of thugs, and they started demolishing their houses in one case, and in another case, completely constructed walls around to stop them being able to get in and out of their houses. And these women went to the police office, they went to other courts, they finally went to a traditional leader who said, you've got no hope unless you get to the LRC in Grahamstown and you get this matter into a high court. And, the high court found that they had been interdicted the head woman from continuing with this behavior. Now, this head woman didn't even have jurisdiction over this area. She had no legal jurisdiction, but traditional leaders at all levels have been so encouraged to think that the land belongs to them, that it is eliciting these kinds of forms of corruption. So last year, the public protector found that 600 million rand had gone missing from the coffers of the Bapu Bamogale, who own Marikana, where the massacre took place. And that 600 million was held in the office of the Premier, Supra Mahumapelo. And it was basically stolen from an office supervised by the Premier. We've got a report that we recently brought out that we're happy to circulate, Lynette, which shows that the Bakhatla Bakhafela near Rustenburg, who own the richest platinum land in the world, have had 25 billion rand in value written off because their chief has entered into all these secret deals which have ended up with all the value ending up offshore. And it's because these deals are legally precarious and because they're secret that you get these overseas investors who are basically fleecing traditional leaders. So these kinds of practices are only possible because government is deeply implicated. There was a commission of inquiry that said that the Bakhatla leader, Nyalala Pilani, who's been the subject of 3 constitutional court judgments, he must be deposed because he was not the legitimate traditional leader. Mahuma Pello refused to depose him. The commission also said that the leader of the Bapo must be deposed. The premier refused to depose him. There have been none of the tribal accounts that were inherited from apartheid have been audited since 1994, despite the law providing that they must be audited annually. And we obviously confronted the Auditor General about that, and the Auditor General said the provincial officers refuse to hand over the finances, so they cannot audit them. And what we have now, what we've had until 2 recent judgments, is that when mining takes place, people's land rights, their surface rights, are simply confiscated because they're not recognized as people having rights to the land. So instead of government coming in and saying, okay, you know, what compensation will this person get, that person get, this person get, and you saying, no, we don't want it, and then there being an expropriation, there's not even an expropriation of these rights because they're deemed to not exist. And just to, you know, the Human Rights Commission has done a report on these abuses in the mining areas, and they found that Patrice Motsepe is using the social and labor plan money that's meant to plow back development to build traditional to build traditional council offices in the areas where he operates, and he operates purely through agreements with the traditional leaders. We've got our deputy president, who every year gives, well, not every year, only in pre-election periods, gives cattle and fleets of vehicles to traditional leaders. Now, I wonder when I'm going to talk about the judgments. Sorry, guys. Yeah, maybe later. But why are these deals legally precarious? Why is government trying to rush these laws through? Why is it pushing them so hard? It's because there is simply no law until the TKLB becomes law that authorizes chiefs to sign these deals. And the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act, when it entrenched these boundaries and these incumbents, said that it had 2 kind of transformation mechanisms. One was that 40% of the members of a traditional council must be elected, and the other was 1/3 of the members must be women. That was in 2003. There hasn't been one election in Limpopo, ever. Government has admitted that none of the traditional councils in Mpumalanga or Limpopo are legally valid, and yet they're signing deals. But even more fundamental, there's no law that authorizes them to sign the deals. There's no law that authorizes them to bind the land rights belonging to other people. So, and government has simply refused to enforce IPILRA. The Minister of Rural Development, who is the minister responsible for IPILRA, routinely endorses surface lease agreements where people have not consented, and does this at a kind of structural level. So what are the laws we've currently got before Parliament? We've got 2 laws amending the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act, because they're worried that one won't. They know that the Traditional and KhoiSan Leadership Bill is unconstitutional, so they've passed another one, which is the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Amendment Bill, that removes the consequence of legal invalidity for traditional councils that have failed to include women or have elected representatives. That's their first immediate desperate problem, that they've got all these invalidly signed mining deals. But the real problem is Clause 24 of the TKLB, which empowers traditional leaders to sign agreements with third parties for the first time. They never had that power during colonialism and apartheid. Initially, there were no consultation requirements. Later, there were weak consultation requirements included, but not with the people affected, with a tribe, which could be 400,000 people who won't be affected, but think they'll get jobs. So they'll agree, while the people affected refuse. And basically, a traditional courts bill that was renegotiated with rural leaders, and is an improvement on the old one, but not fantastic, has been jettisoned by the Portfolio Committee, who insists they want to go back to the 2008 one with those draconian powers. They're saying no one must be allowed to opt out. Now, Carl van Holt argues that the levels of violence and authoritarianism that we have in society at the moment is necessary to contain the high levels of structural marginalization of the poor. And it will become increasingly necessary as marginalization deepens. And for me, the fact that the TCB was put in there from the start shows that the drafters of our legislation were aware that you can't dispossess people and deny them their citizenship rights if you haven't got force behind you, and that the people who are going to be the primary agents of using that force were envisaged to be traditional leaders. So really what's happening here is extraordinary short-termism. There's no planning for the future. It's basically looting people's rights, looting people's land, selling it off to foreigners for a quick buck, and trying to protect the existing deals for a quick buck. And what these bills show is that there's no alternative vision for mining. There's no vision for how mining could be done in a way where people achieve viable alternative compensation. Because it would be far cheaper for the mining houses to plot where the mining is going to take place and to negotiate directly with the families who are affected and to compensate them properly than to pay millions to traditional leaders who end up basically not accounting for that money. But it seems that the mining houses are in such a symbiotic relationship with the state that they can't afford to actually say, we stand for these people's property rights and we will negotiate with them. Because what might happen is if compensation is properly worked out, it might mean that mining is not viable. That this mining that's taking place, especially the coal mining, is only viable if you don't compensate people properly. And you get out and you've destroyed the water table and you've destroyed the environment and you've completely dispossessed the poorest of the poor. So one other thing I just wanted to mention is we had two very, very important court judgments last year. One was the Maledu judgment in the Constitutional Court about the Bakgatla Bakhafela. And in that judgment, the Constitutional Court unanimously said that this practice of treating black landowners as if they have no rights and simply confiscating their rights is contrary to the Constitution, and that Section 25 and EPILRA must be complied with. So that's a massive game changer. And it's also a game changer in that they said compensation must be agreed before mining starts, because the current practice now is mining starts, the land is utterly devalued, people become desperate because their houses are cracking, and then they end up agreeing to whatever is put to them. And then we had the Xolobeni judgment, which said the same for the Wild Coast, the struggles of the Xolobeni people. But Minister Mantashe has appealed that judgment. And within 3 weeks of the Maledu judgment, the Department of Traditional Affairs had amended the Traditional KhoiSan Leadership Bill to say, you know, chiefs can sign these deals notwithstanding any other law. In other words, notwithstanding EPILRA. It can't fly constitutionally. The bill will be struck down. But it took us 6 years to get the Communal Land Rights Act struck down. And how many people's houses will be destroyed and how many people will be dispossessed in that 6-year period?
My name is Lungisile Tsebeza. I'm at the University of Cape Town. I've been asked to do something that I discourage my students to do. That is to speak off the cuff. I always encourage them to prepare, but now I'm breaking my own rules. The topic of chiefs is something I've been doing for some time. And it came about when I was doing research, not on chiefs, not on rural areas, but on the country bumpkins. And I was interested to know what they do when they go back to the countryside. Because I had studied in the cities that they come as country bumpkins and they are bullied, but over time they transform and in some cases become members of youth gangs. So I was interested to know what happens when they go back home. And when I went to this particular village in the Queenstown area in 1994-95, I discovered that whenever you ask questions about youth and what they were doing, I was told that they were sort of giving headmen and chiefs problems. And they were asking them to be accountable. They wanted to know where the financial records were and so on. So I slowly, gradually became interested in the topic and ended up doing research on the meaning of democracy in the countryside. And this issue was made more interesting in the sense that whilst young people were going to offices of SANCO, which was the civic organization that was active in the countryside, elderly people were going to the tribal authority. So, and as I was doing this investigation, I thought that there was a tension between people who believe in democracy and those who believe in tribal authorities. Democracy believing in elected representation and tribal authorities which are imposed, appointed leadership and so on. And the question I asked, which became my PhD thesis and the book that followed, was what is the meaning of democracy for people living in the countryside? Now, what interested me at the time was how the ANC would respond to this question, how the ANC would resolve what I thought was a contradiction. And for years, until 2003, the ANC, the term I used was ambivalent. At one point, they would be pro-democratic forces, but at times, they would be on the side of chiefs. And so when I wrote my PhD, I ended up saying that the ANC hadn't resolved this tension. But when the two bills were passed, the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act of 2003 and the Communal Land Rights Act of 2004 that Aninka talked about, and I was in the process of writing a book on this topic. I got my title for the book, which was Democracy Compromised. So the book that came out in 2005, after these two bills were passed, had the title Democracy Compromised. Because then I realized on reading these laws that the ANC had compromised our democratic project. So in many ways, what I'm hearing Aninka talking about is not surprising. It just shows that that ambivalence that I was grappling with for 10 years, the first 10 years of our democracy, that the agenda now is open from the ANC side, that they are anti-democratic. in many ways. Now, that's one issue that I hope we can discuss. But the other one, also coming from what I hear Aninka talking about, the title talks about the role of law. And sometimes you may think that there is no law, right? But here we have an instance where there is a law that protects the informal rights of people. And that law was promulgated in 1996. And in 2019, we were still talking about the transgression of land rights of people when there is a law in place. So the question that I'm asking is the problem the existence or non-existence of law, or is it just a question of impunity? People not doing things irrespective of the law and escaping with murder. And I'm inclined to answer my own question and say it's the latter. And it's not happening only in rural areas. It's something that has become part and parcel of the DNA of South Africa. That people do things with impunity, and the question is, reminds me of an interview this morning in SABC 404. Aninka, was it not Aninka? No, this morning program. Yes, but the two journalists, lady journalists, and in this program. But it says it was at 7 o'clock. Sakina, yeah. Sakina and the other journalists, they were interviewing the Chief Justice today. I don't know who saw that. You saw it? Very exciting, very interesting, but also very disturbing. When you saw the person who is the top legal brain almost giving up that there are laws, but these laws are violated. And they are violated by those who are the strongest. So it seems to me that we don't, at this point in time, have a way of dealing with the strong and mighty. And I think that's the issue that we must confront. The law is there, the law is necessary, but the law on its own, in my mind, doesn't seem to be sufficient. We need to go beyond the law. But saying that, I'm not saying that we must replace the law. The law is there. It must be there to enable some things to happen. But the law on its own is not going to save us.
Are they making money out of it? Or is it because they think it'll get them votes? Or what else is it?
So the TKLB is the only bill that's been passed by both the National Assembly and the NCOP and is on the President's desk for his assent. Everything else is still in the parliamentary process. Has the department given any indication which bills it's going to revive, given that everything ended at the end of the administration?
There must be some. I know it's on paper, but there must be somebody or some organization or the whatever they might be. They must enforce most of the law. Thank you.
Okay. From the beginning up until where we are, there is no justice. I think if we can try and find out how are we going to bring justice first, then everything will fall on its own places. Thanks.
Mining has always been the money house of South Africa. And there was a deal that cut certain politically connected people in to mining. And someone like Motsepe has, strong connections with the Bophuthatswana Bantustan, knew exactly where all the platinum was, came in flanked by his brother-in-law, who was the Minister of Minerals, and got a deal signed in terms of which the mineral rights of the Macau community went to his company. So, you know, there is a traditional leader that people have rebelled against in Limpopo, David Langa. They burnt down his house, they burnt down everything that he has touched because of his role in dealing with Anglo Platinum. And he was financing the ANC branch. So, you know, you got direct financing of the ANC by some of these chiefs who are kept in place by people like Mahuma Pelo, despite these commissions of inquiry. And you've got cabinet members and deputy cabinet members who are beneficiaries in this deal, in these deals. So you've got a high level of very high value deals involving platinum, and then you've got, unfortunately, another level of mining deals involving coal, where people are in it for a quick buck. They don't care about the environment, they don't care about the people who get displaced. The value of those coal mines, that coal should not be mined because it has irrevocable damage on people's lives and on the environment. But they get these authorizations. We know that the Department of Mineral Resources was so utterly corrupt that even Gwede Mantashe, who absolutely opposes these constitutional court judgments and is appealing them, even he closed down the Mpumalanga and another one of those departments of mineral resources.
Money or votes, I think in a situation where the state is seen as a site of wealth accumulation, then votes count. So the two go together. And this is what we are seeing. And this is what we have been seeing, you know, in the rest of the continent. And we used to laugh at our brothers and sisters, saying that, no, they are banana republics and so on. And they used, you know, to warn us, to say that, well, we are an image of your future. And I think they were correct there. And who is supposed to make the law work? I'm not a lawyer, but I can draw from what I hear lawyers, what lawyers say, including the Chief Justice today, where they would say that in order for law to work, you must have a person who's going to present a case. Without a case, so there must be a bold individual or individuals and so on out there who are going to say, we have seen an act of wrong and we are going to report this. And those people must be protected. And then, of course, when once you have those, you have a prosecution, a qualified prosecutor, and the matter goes to court.
Can I approach the Constitutional Court?
Right.
As a person?
I think I want to address my question to both of our speakers, please. But in the court of public opinion, which likes quite nice, easy answers, people respond to this kind of discussion by saying, yes, but our people need jobs, and this is going to bring jobs and development, and the N2 needs to be brought nearer to the coastline in the Eastern Cape. And why is this a problem? If the chiefs are entering into contracts which bring in money and investment and so on. And that's the kind of conversation which, apart from the legal thing, I think we need to try and address. So how can all of us elevate the voices of the people who are trying to be the rebellion and the resistance, and who are so often unseen in that court of public opinion?
I think in understanding what your paper says and what Prof has reflected on, we must understand these things to do something. Which brings me to the issue of the agency of the rural masses themselves. I think that we know that we have a Xhosa king in jail, you know. And yet you see a lot of other traditional leaders going on as if there is no law. That's one area. And then we see a really gallant resistance from the community of Xholobeni around the issue of mining. So we really see these promising cases, but they remain exceptions. The standard is that people continue to be exploited. The standard is that the chiefs in numbers get away with crimes that they are committing. I'm reminded that, firstly, for rural masses to be able to respond, they do need space and support to organize themselves. As someone who has worked in rural areas, you do find that even to get a place to have a meeting, you need to go and have permission from the chief. So we get a reality whereby whatever is presented here, it will not travel far enough to where it is intended. So my question is, what really can it be done? What really can be done to really inspire a more radical response from the rural masses themselves? Because we can speak about these things in Cape Town. These Contralesa guys will just shoot it down and that, look, we are not in rural areas, you know. So you have a luxury of being in metros and talk about these things. So my question is around, what really can we do to ensure that there is a strong appreciation at village level about these issues? Because these leaders go about their business knowing that people in their villages are in the dark. They don't know. Some don't struggle even to understand, you know, what democracy should mean in today's South Africa, even there. So the agency of rural, you know, masses is the issue for me, that we can understand the laws, we can understand the constitution, understand these things. As long as this thing is not driven from that angle, then our efforts here really are not going to make the kind of impact that we really like to see.
Is it okay for someone that doesn't own land to take on the constitutional, and if it's okay for them to take on this case, even if you're not a landowner, can you as an individual take on this case specifically? Thank you.
A number of environmental laws that you should be able to use to either interdict some of the action or alternatively to at least delay and protect people's rights. Have people not been using it, or has the department itself just not been coming to the party?
The Human Rights Commission did a big report on mining, which we really do need more people to be aware of. And they found the same as the Motlanthe high-level panel, that mining is not enriching these rural communities. The money is disappearing down a black hole. The Bafokeng are being sued, who are the so-called richest tribe in Africa, are being sued by their lawyers because they have no money. The Bakhatla, who have this incredibly valuable minerals, are bankrupt. So the argument that this brings development is palpably wrong. And it's the same throughout Africa. You've got this terrible thing of the state acting really as a pimp. Instead of regulating how these foreign companies operate here, it takes a slice. And it's this incredibly short-term view that if I get a slice and the resources are finished, doesn't matter as long as I've got my slice. So, you know, Gwede Mantashe, when he said he's going to appeal the Xholobeni judgment, he said, if rural communities have the right to say no to mining, there will be no mining in South Africa. And that's because the terms on which they are being treated utterly deny that they have land rights and that they have any kind of authority. So for him to say that is to basically admit that they get nothing from mining. And so, you know, even the Chamber of Mines can begin to understand that. So, I think that these two judgments really are really are very significant. He can't appeal the Constitutional Court judgment. And the mining houses and cabinet have had to say, yes, we accept that people have got land rights and that they must either consent or they must be expropriated. So there's going to be, they actually are a deal breaker. They are very different. And then this question about, Xolobeni are so brave, but they're the exception. It's true because these mining companies buy people off. They divide them. And very few people can withstand the kinds of bribes that are offered. So there's a place called Tsomkeli, a gold mine, where they're now offering people who they dispossessed previously with no compensation. They now realize that they've got to offer them 100,000 because they're going to completely remove them. They'll have nothing, no land, no houses, nothing. And they'll give them 200,000 once everyone has agreed. So the ones who had agreed are now forming a vigilante gang to try and force the others to agree. So there's this kind of incredible divide and rule that's happening. And it's exceptional that communities remain as united as Xolobeni. There is another struggle, which is Makasaneni, where Lark helped to get a documentary film made, where people also were incredibly united, and where they also had death threats, and they've won. And then there are, very, very brave people amongst the Bapo and the Bakatla. So what we've been doing is we've been taking the film This Land and showing it in these different rural communities. We had initially thought it would be a film for thought leaders, and it's actually been much more effective amongst rural communities where people start drawing the parallels between their situation. I personally think that the only way to get this to foreground rural voices is to get the debate going on vernacular radio. Because I think that if there were chat shows in all different languages and people could hear these issues, there are enough strong, eloquent people in every province to actually discuss these things. And I think that one of the reasons the ANC has been able to get away with it is that most people don't know about these laws. If they knew that government is passing laws that deny their property rights. So I've really been hoping for a very long time that we could find some way of actually going and getting sound bites from people, telling their stories, and then getting debates on all the different radio stations about them. We have got something called Stop the Bantustan Bills campaign, and we hope everyone here will sign the petition. And we've just got a little video that came out of a debate at the Nelson Mandela Foundation where you see people speaking from every province in relation to specific examples. But I mean, that is not mass rural mobilization. We can't pretend that it is. And then, the people who bought the Maledu case, this very important case in the Constitutional Court, are people who actually purchased the land 100 years ago, but because they were black, they weren't allowed to have it in their name. So they didn't have title deeds. And in the end, they won the case because they have informal land rights protected by IPILRA. And IPILRA actually applies in urban areas too, but it needs to be updated. And it says anyone who's lived on land as if they are the owner should be treated as the owner. So not paying rent to somebody else, but you just kind of de facto control and own it. So those people all have standing. They all have standing to take their cases to court. The trouble is that you need lawyers. You're not going to do it without lawyers. And one of the real tragedies is we don't have enough lawyers to take these cases. We've got some very clever lawyers that get some good precedents, but the whole legal system is biased in favor of those who pay the lawyers.
It's not just a question of scarcity of lawyers, it's also the expense that is involved. If you are poor, you stand very little chance of taking these costs, even not to put them on the agenda, let alone defend them throughout. So that's, I think our legal system needs more reform than we have seen so far. I have this case, I think you're talking about this case, that one that was decided by Petse. Yes, yeah, now I've been reading it, it's a superb judgment. Starts now with a quote from Fanon. And so, it is. And coming from it. And The question of agency. I mean, I agree now with you, this need for agency, and historically, rural people now have had a voice. I mean, the 40s in particular, 40s and the 50s. And the 80s. Yeah, 80s, early 90s. I mean, this land occupation and so on, people not demarcating land, no disregarding tribal authorities and so on. So at least now we have a history of resistance. And so that gives us hope. But I think what has been a shortcoming of the rural struggles is that they have been isolated. And those of us who live in urban areas have been witnesses and not participants. And some of us who are in urban areas have got a rural background or rural contacts. But when people are faced with a difficulty in rural areas, we tend to adopt the us and them attitude. I think these struggles will be stronger if they are integrated. If we break these barriers, urban, rural, and so on. And then lastly, on the issue of public opinion, I just want to read I hope, I think I'll find it, a quote that I liked, and it's been doing the rounds for some time from Soyinka, the novelist. And this is what it says. Only in Africa will thieves be regrouping to loot again, and the youths whose future is being stolen will be celebrating it.
And government boasts that it brings the KhoiSan in on equal terms with other traditional leaders. It provides them with recognition. But the bill provides traditional leaders in the former homelands with power over land. They have land jurisdiction. The KhoiSan are not given any jurisdiction over land. They're given jurisdiction over people who affiliate with them. And people have got to go and take their ID books and affiliate and re-affiliate. And if someone hasn't affiliated with you, you've got no authority over them. Now, if you did that in the former homelands, it would be fantastic, because all the people who don't want these chiefs would not be bound by them. But it's completely discriminatory, because a core demand of the KhoiSan has been recognition of their land rights. And it completely undercuts any kind of territorial basis. And what it does is it just pays leaders who are recognized. So it elicits a whole lot of people demanding to be traditional leaders so that they can get salaries. So, there have been some groups that are in favor of the KhoiSan Leadership Bill, some KhoiSan groups, and others that are strongly opposed to it because it's recognition without land. And what the groups who are opposing it, who are opposing the Bantustan side of it, are saying, split the bill. We don't want to do anything against KhoiSan recognition, and it's for the KhoiSan to decide if they're prepared to have recognition without land. But don't pretend that this bill is about benefiting the KhoiSan, when actually it's about giving traditional leaders unilateral power. So I think that's also a debate that an issue that needs to be discussed amongst groups who have KhoiSan heritage or are interested in KhoiSan recognition.
I want to say thank you very much to our two guest speakers, Aninka and Lungisile, for really giving us a lot of food for thought. And sometimes we fight these wars on the legal battle, but there are many times when we actually have to do multiple other strategies to help shift a particular discourse. And I think the question of us building solidarity across urban and rural divides is becoming more important than we've ever imagined. Because as these deals go through in those areas, no sooner will they and it's being experimented there and allowed to happen, and there's precedent, no sooner will those be reversed in urban areas. So I don't think that we need to think that these struggles are separate. It's one country, and a common citizenship and common set of rights that are protected within the Bill of Rights. We need to fight side by side. So thank you very much for the very thought-provoking conversation. And thank you to you, the audience, for taking the time to be here. Thank you very much indeed.